He is a church builder, a school builder, a ministry builder. And he's a family man. He's a husband, a father, and a dear friend. I'd like to introduce to you Pastor Glenn Adams and his wife, Norma.
If there was one thing that I wanted people to know about my dad, is he loved Jesus like nobody I ever knew.
Probably 4th, 5th, 6th grade, somewhere in there, it occurred to me, I don't want my dad to be like everybody else's dad. I got a better version because he was present.
For me as a little girl, I just was always kind of in awe of my dad.
More than anything, I want his life and the heritage that he left to be celebrated.
I just think I grew up with this feeling that my dad was just this bigger than life person in some ways.
I always remember he had a song for everything.
All you had to do was say the outlook wasn't good for the Mudville 9 that day, and he would take off with Casey at the bat.
Horatius at the bridge, he could call it up at a moment's notice.
He had a remarkable mind to be able to remember these things years and years and years later.
Oftentimes he took liberties with the poetry to kind of add his own little twist to them that I genuinely thought were the actual versions, and I remember being corrected and one time scolded at school for having recited it according to my dad's version.
One of his favorite things is hymn history.
The devotional time often involved a hymn history, and then he would often sing the song. And when I say sing the song, I use that loosely.
He did everything with gusto. When he sang, it was very full.
He tended to not necessarily remember all of the words to that song. He might not even remember the tune to that song, but he would still go ahead and ad lib because it was an expression of his love for Christ.
I still have that in my head, watching my mom and my dad have devotions together.
And beyond his humor and the funny stories and the singing and all of that, he truly had such a special relationship with God.
He grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City. His dad worked for the post office.
He obviously grew up in a home that was, I think it would be fair to say, was structured.
He went to school throughout his elementary years up into high school at Shawnee Mission North, where he met Mom. She thought he was a little sketchy. She
said she didn't date beer drinkers, and because he was kind of a partier, I guess.
But one of her girlfriends talked her into going out with him, and he immediately liked her because she laughed at his jokes.
And I think Mom has said that his humor is what she was really drawn to because he was so funny.
But what he didn't know about her was that she was some kind of religious nut.
She says, okay, well, I will agree to go out with you on Saturday night if you're at church with me on Sunday.
He didn't know the Lord at that time, and so eventually it was going to be through that relationship with Mom that he encountered Christ.
The other thing he didn't know at the time was that this girl he was dating, God had called her to be a pastor's wife. But he had no inclination of being a pastor. But she didn't want to tell him that. She didn't want him to be a pastor because he was chasing her. He wanted her to be a pastor because God called him to be that.
Career-wise, he had an interest in forestry. He even spent a summer or two working for the Forestry Service.
And he actually went to the University of Idaho because he thought he was going to be a forest ranger. And while he was there, God called him to be a preacher. And so he shared with her that God had called him into the pastorate. And you can imagine she was thanking God because she really saw some hope in this relationship, which turned out to be a long-term relationship.
They were married while they were still in college. They talk about it every once in a while. They lived in the single wide trailer, and Dad talked about it was the best time of his life because he could lie in bed and brush his teeth all at the same time. They often talked about dinner being popcorn and grape juice and all those kinds of things.
He thought he had a certain plan in life, and then that changed. That's a big change, to completely give up what you thought you were going to do to all of a sudden go into ministry where you're asking for support. And he was very willing to just go wherever he felt like God was leading him to.
Once Dad was convinced of a vision, and once God had sealed it on his heart, there wasn't anything that was going to talk him out of it. I think that really became probably one of the patterns of his life.
We moved to a couple different ministries. God called him out to Wyoming. We were there for 7 years. And then God said, I want you to come back to Kansas.
It became apparent that God had put a call on Dad's life to start a church back in Olathe.
He didn't really want to go back to his own country because this was home for him, but God said go, and he went.
He did everything with his whole heart, didn't do anything half-heartedly.
And when it wasn't popular, when it wasn't a lot of them around, God said, I think I want you to start a Christian school. The Christian school that I'm still a part of 45 years later.
When you think about legacy really defines a person not in just one dimension of their life. I think that a legacy is multidimensional.
Really, more than anything, there were 4 words that came to my mind: grace, patience, forgiveness, and unconditional love.
And my dad had a really interesting way of helping us really feel the heart of God.
He was very committed to his calling, but you never really got the sense that he took himself too seriously.
Was always joyful, always personable. I used to tell people that he never met anybody he couldn't be a friend with.
I think what I remember so much is that he was so respected, and I can remember everybody wanted his time.
Even though he had a lot of responsibility, there was always a sense of presence.
The way in which he spent time, not just with my brother and I, but with every kid in the neighborhood, because he was the dad who would spend time with his kids.
So one of my very favorite things is when he started doing daddy-daughter dates. And so for me, that was such a wonderful time that I got to have my dad just by myself.
And I am so thankful that I had the example of a godly father who was in love with Jesus, in love with his word, like no one I've ever known.
I think about when he loved other people, how he ministered to other people, the relationships that he would build with people in order for him to have an open door to share the love of God.
Dad touched a lot of people's lives because he had the ability to communicate his heart and the heart of Christ in ways that people found approachable.
And I think that was just such a great quality of his that brought joy to a lot of people.
He continued to touch lives until God took him home, and that's I think that's a pretty cool legacy. We've all heard great symphonies. Pages and pages and pages and pages of individual notes played by literally dozens of instruments. I think that's a great way to think about my dad's legacy, a legacy of a symphony of life. Whether it's the people that he influenced as a pastor for 40 years, as a Christian school administrator, his own family, and his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and their memories of him. I think the individual people that he's impacted are the notes and instruments of his symphony. And one of those instruments by itself is perhaps not all that impressive, but how God wove all those different notes together, and then you have that beautiful, memorable, powerful expression that comes through that piece of music.